Hello there! So mods are constructive criticism for maps, and an essential part of improving as a mapper. Most mods are currently done through forum posts, which detail specific problems, and soon that'll be replaced by this thing called modding v2. Regardless of what platform they're on though, mods all have the same intended purpose: to improve a map and its mapper. Now, at this point, you might be thinking this is a bit contradictory. I'm talking about mods being essential when last week's video explained my personal opinion on the low value of mods. What's going on here? A lot of people seem to be missing the point of that video: to make mods more valuable. Mods are most effective when they're given to people who actually need them, not experienced mappers who already know what they're doing. That was the message of the video, but that alone doesn't make mods more valuable. Sometimes I see mods focus on things that aren't helpful, unintentionally detriment a map, or mislead a mapper, all of which go against the point of mods. To actually make mods more valuable, I think explaining my opinion on how to mod is also important, so that's what I'm going to do here today. The first part of modding for me is determining what type of advice is best to give. New mappers and experienced mappers have vastly different ideas about how they design their maps, and therefore I provide different advice to each of them. When starting out, new mappers often don't have much logic to back up their object placements. I really struggle to understand the concepts new mappers use because, for the most part, there aren't any, and if there are, they're just not clear enough. Concepts used in relation to the music is what I consider the core of quality mapping, which I talk about in like every video. So the best type of mod for new mappers is general advice explaining these mapping concepts. Being too specific wouldn't be that helpful because specific changes won't improve a map that's fundamentally flawed. When modding these types of maps, it sometimes seems just linking a mapping guide is the best way to give general advice, but mods allow a more personal way to teach new mappers, which is far more influential to them. To explain why, let's imagine I'm modding this map. It's full of nonsensical mapping, but I'm not gonna just say, hey dude, watch all my videos on remap, see you later. Instead, I'll focus on concepts that are relevant to a mapper at this skill level. So I can see the map doesn't use rhythm properly, meaning I could start out by saying how sliders should match a song's important sounds through clicking. You know what I'm talking about from just that, but a new mapper probably wouldn't. To make my point have meaning to a mapper, I can reference their map and explain why certain sliders are rhythmically good or bad. Because this problem's everywhere on the map too, I can also mention that the idea applies elsewhere. And with that, I'm kinda done explaining stuff about sliders and rhythm. I don't need to link every single bad slider because understanding the issue and letting a mapper figure out where it applies is a lot more important than just fixing the issue. I said earlier that the purpose of a mod is to improve a map, but that's only in the short term. In the long term, a mod can improve a mapper, and that's a really important thing to understand at this stage. Moving on though, I could explain some more concepts in a similar fashion, but I'd stop after 2 or 3 of them. Explaining everything problematic about the map would overwhelm an inexperienced mapper, so prioritizing what matters and explaining it in a relatable way is what I find best. Okay then, new mappers out of the way, what about experienced mappers? They're scary, they have reasoning behind their decisions. To mod these maps, a modder needs to comprehend what concepts they use, then provide specific advice explaining mistakes and alternative mapping options, all while taking into account the mapper's intentions. To understand this a little better, let's imagine I'm modding this map now. It handles rhythm appropriately, spacing too, looks pretty nice, and oh, but this, I made a video about this. Movement along a slider body should imply movement to the next object. This slider curves this way, and the next object is the other way. This isn't good flow. I'll point it out in my mod and say this can flow better. Yeah, I'm helping. Except, this suggestion might not actually improve the map. There's a good chance an experienced mapper would have a reason to make objects flow in this unideal way. If we look a little further into the map, the rest of the section also breaks the implied slider flow concept. Meanwhile, all other sections of the map obey implied slider flow. As the modder, I may prefer smooth gameplay, but the mapper doesn't need to comply with my ideals. The mapper is expressing a unique section of the music with a unique type of gameplay, a perfectly valid concept. So, the suggestion, in this case, wouldn't be good to apply. Mods shouldn't break the mapper's intentions. On the other hand, if there were unsmooth gameplay in a section with entirely smooth gameplay, and no musical cue to indicate a change there, it could be considered a mistake. Suggesting to use good flow, in this case, could be helpful, not because the flow is better, but because it better reflects the mapper's intentions. While mistakes like this are important to explain, mods can include more than that. Suggesting alternative viewpoints is fairly common in mods, and they can be helpful when complementing a map's concepts. For example, stacking these makes the downbeat of the chorus stand out. But there's also nothing really wrong with how it originally was. Changing this to another form of emphasis is the mapper's decision. The final thing to pay attention to on experienced mappers' maps is whether or not their concepts make sense, I guess. If the concepts are unclear, maybe mention that. An incomprehensible map probably means the mapper should be clearer about their intentions. So by now, you should understand how I mod maps from both new and experienced mappers. There's a ton of mappers in between those two categories, and depending on their skill level, I give a mix of general and specific advice. It really depends on what the map has to offer. The last part of actually forming a mod, which is relevant for pretty much all mappers, is the ranking criteria. Maps pushing towards rank are the ones that receive mods, so if they break the ranking criteria, there's a good chance they need revision. While the content of a mod is important, presentation also matters. If a map does something you don't really like, explain why. Be constructive about suggestions, not insulting or condescending. It sounds obvious, but a code of conduct had to be written because people get really mad when talking about mapping stuff. The last thing I need to mention here is mod replies. When a mapper receives a mod, they apply suggestions they agree with, give it kudos, and then make a post explaining why they deny any suggestions. By doing this, the modder can understand a mapper's intentions better and apply that knowledge to future maps and mods. For a mapper, this means explaining your ideas to any future modders as well, so it's important for mod replies to also be constructive and follow the code of common sense. Anyway, that's what I consider the basics of modding and how I choose to mod. If you're interested in finding maps to mod yourself or getting mods on your own maps, check out the Modding Queues subforum or the mod requests chat room in-game. If you want to get a little more insight on modding or just listen to me talk, I've recorded myself modding a map set and replying to some mods, so maybe it'll teach you something. Maybe it won't. It exists either way. And finally, thanks to Firedigger, Sklife, Jarl, and Dashi for directly supporting this video.